How about this one? That was the Nymphes. This is the Juno. Did I get this identical? No, but I just whipped it together to show you. That part of what feels magic on the Juno can be captured in other gear without any trouble, even if they're fundamentally different architectures. You just have to understand what you're programming towards if those restrictions are valuable, if those limitations are part of the sound. If they're not, who cares? Hello, my name is Jorb. I love gear. This is a Dreadbox Nymphes. This is a Roland Juno 106. And this video will be an actually thorough comparison of their architecture. Can the Nymphes do the Juno thing? What does the Juno thing really mean? What all can the Juno do? And all sorts of good stuff like that. I'm doing it for one reason and one reason alone, and I'm being more candid than I normally am. But I watch a lot of synth YouTube, and I saw a bigger channel do a Nymphes and Juno 106 video. And it seems to me like they just realized that's something people were interested in, and threw together a video without actually teaching people anything or exploring the idea of how close are these, how can they actually compare to one another. And I thought to myself, I could do better. So I stopped working on the other things I was working on, and I threw this together. I don't have an outline, but I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to step through every section of control, every section of synthesis here on the Juno, compare it to what the Nymphes can do, and the Nymphes in almost every situation can do a little bit more, so that'll get discussed as well. But I want you to go into this with a few caveats. One, these instruments are not trying to accomplish the same thing. They're from radically different eras. And if anybody tells you they're buying one or the other based only on the sound, they're lying. And I think if somebody tells you they're buying one or the other based only on the synthesis parameters, they're lying. This is not apples to apples. This is big and heavy and has a keyboard and is about $2,000 and requires maintenance. And this is $600. It's the size of a Volca. It's got modern support and modern features. And I could go on and on about how these are different, but they're not trying to be the same product. Okay? So there's that first thing out of the way. One being good does not mean the other is bad. A difference does not mean one is better. It just means they're different, okay? So if there's something the Juno does that the Nymphes accomplishes differently or acts a little differently, that doesn't mean one is better or worse. It just means they're different. And even if they are different, and they are very, can the Nymphes do the Juno thing? Depends on how you think of it. Can it make similar sounds to the Juno? Of course it can. Is it trying to do that explicitly? No. So all that out of the way, shall we get into the real information, huh? If you aren't subscribed, you should. I like talking about gear. I like teaching people stuff. If you have an interest in that, you should stick around. Okay? Cool. That's my favorite pitch I've ever done. It didn't feel fake at all. Shall we begin with the oscillators? I have my oscilloscope on, and I'll label which one's which. For me, the Juno's on top. I might move it around. We're just on the Juno at its 8-foot range. And one thing you'll notice, if I play the same note over multiple octaves, on the Juno, it does not move that much, okay? And I'm going to swap which track is muted and change the triggering mode. My oscilloscope, now this is just the Nymphes. See how much that's moving? See how it's moving much more, it's quivering much more? That may just be down to the Juno is DCOs, digitally controlled oscillators, where you're locked to pitch by a digital control, a digital source, and VCOs on the Nymphes, which you're locked in pitch by a voltage source, which is going to waver based on a few factors. I don't know if there's more to the design than that. I know VCOs can be more stable than we're seeing here on the Nymphes, but I'm going to turn both audio sources on now, and the oscilloscope is triggering with the Juno, which should be more stable pitch. That's the Juno, that's the Nymphes, and watch every time I change notes. And this will tell us their relative pitch. This one's quite close, although the Nymphes is wavering. This one's pretty different, and the Nymphes is wavering. That is a fundamental difference in the way these function. Does it result in a fundamental difference in sound? Kind of. So this is just the Juno. Okay, this is just the Nymphes. Both are just sustained. Both have the filter all the way up. Just a sawtooth. The Juno's a little brighter. So fundamentally, from the very beginning, these oscillators are tuned differently. These oscillators hold their pitch in a different way. And the Nymphes is, I'm not saying inaccurate, I'm saying it's more lively. It's moving always from the get-go. And that's how VCOs are. And again, I don't know if there's more to the design than that. But I have detune off, and I will show you one more time. Then I'm going to clear all my modulations. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Clear aftertouch. Okay. And there's no modulation on the Nymphes. There's no chorus on. There's no detune. That is just how they are. Is that a bad thing? Absolutely not. In a lot of cases, people consider that to be a good thing for a synthesizer. So I just want to show you that right away. Say, hey, what we're working with from the get-go is different. And then, shall we continue that trend? We're locked to the Juno again. If we turn on our pulse wave, that's what we hear on the Juno. We don't have variable amounts. And here's a manual sweep of our pulse width. Here's a higher pitch, so we have more visible cycles on the oscilloscope. And then I'm going to leave that on and turn it off so you can see where the sawtooth is at. Okay, so the pulse width is on 50% of the time. The way you see it, the way it visualizes, half of that sawtooth is going to get pushed upward. So we still see that slant on top. It's less visible on the bottom. Cool. So now we're going to change the Nymphes. So we're locked in with the Nymphes. And I'm going to move this wave slider halfway to the square, or the pulse wave. Completely different. Totally fundamentally different. Our square wave, or our pulse wave, does not start and stop at the same point as our sawtooth like it does on the Juno. And I'm going to leave them both open for a second here. Those waves are totally different, and they sound totally different. So this is just the Nymphes again. You hear much more audible square, and that might just be because I pushed too far into the range, but because they don't have the same split point there, and it's not even like the end of the cycle of the sawtooth is where the square wave is at. The square wave is like in the middle of that wave. Is that good or bad? No, it's just different. And that means these things are going to sound different. Yes, of course, we have more range on our fader. We go all the way to a triangle, which the Juno cannot do. I quite like. Let's stay on bass here, huh? So the way they add their two waves when you have a pulse and a sawtooth on is fundamentally different and sounds different because of it. Alrighty, we're moving on to the sub. Back to just the Juno. As I increase the sub, I'm going to use a relatively high note so we can see multiple cycles on our oscilloscope here. As I bring in the sub, when you move up the sub, it's a square wave at half the rate of our sawtooth, right? So every other wave will move up, and the ones that do not move up will move down. So there it is halfway up. Our sub is halfway up. So we have this alternating tall and short sawtooth. And if we have it all the way up, it's almost like one bigger sawtooth. With that little notch in the middle of its pulse width. And with a little bit of a little bit of filtering, you don't notice that at all. So the sub on the Juno, because it's locked in phase with our sawtooth, does an excellent job of just adding low end. Okay, and we're going to show you how it works on the Nymphes. Really similarly. And if we bring down the volume of our sawtooth, we can accomplish pretty much the same thing. It just sounds like a bigger sawtooth. Wonderful. It sounds like just a much bigger sawtooth, which is awesome and exactly the way I like my subs to work. But I'm going to bring back just a sawtooth. And they both have white noise. Let's do... Okay, it's a little darker on the Nymphes. We get a little bleed all the time. There you go. The noise is a little brighter on the Juno. Not that that makes a difference to most people. As far as modulation for the DeepMind's oscillator, you can't do anything with the envelope, but you can use the LFO to modulate the pitch or the pulse width of the one oscillator, and the sub will go with it because it's locked in pitch with the main oscillator. With the Nymphes, yes, we have two LFOs, and we can use one to modulate the pitch, and you can use an LFO to modulate your pulse width, but they cannot be the same LFO. We'll come back to that later, okay? They both have a high-pass filter. I do not know for sure that the Nymphes does or does not introduce a low-end boost at minimum at 0, which the Juno does. Here's our Juno. Okay, we're going to change over to the Nymphes. Here's the Nymphes. Nymphes has more range on its high pass, and it's variable. You just have the 4 notches here on the Juno. Locked back to the Juno. Okay, onto the filter. This is going to be a hard one to demonstrate. Let's hear it sounds with a chord. More resonance. And a little bit more resonance. Possibly too much resonance. Cool. There we go. I'm going to do that same thing. Now we're on the Nymphes, same chord. The pot is smoother in the values it puts out. I don't know the exact resolution of the Juno. It's either 127 or 256, but you can notice those. And I don't know the exact resolution of the Nymphes either, but I can tell you just from feeling it right now, it is finer. And that feels better as well. Awesome. I'm going to go back one more time. Okay, just that, my initial impression, I like the filter of the Nymphes more, but that's not my point. Do they sound the same? I can't tell. I think they're quite close. Maybe in editing, I'll notice more of a difference, but they're both 4-pole filters. They're both able to self-resonate. I'm not going to go through the modulation now, but they can both be controlled by an envelope. The Juno can go positive or negative. You can only do positive envelope modulation of your filter on the Nymphes. You cannot go negative. Yes, you can use an LFO. There's keyboard tracking on both. The VCA is not worth mentioning, but paired with the envelopes, it is. You only have one envelope on the Juno, and you have two on the Nymphes. So if you want to If you want to stay within the bounds of what the Juno can do on the Nymphes, you need to match your envelopes up. You need to match your two envelopes up identically, or if you're using gated VCA, you have your VCA envelope sustain all the way up and your filter envelope doing whatever it is your one envelope is doing on the Juno. I will explore the maximum range of these parameters though. So here is full attack and no sustain on the Juno. That is not that long. Same thing on the Nymphes. Way slower. I'll let it play out this time, but I'm not going to do any of the other parameters like this because it demonstrates my point. Much, much longer. Cool, there you go. The time range of the Nymphes envelopes are much longer, and you have two of them, which is a massive flexibility of synthesis. And so, about that point where I've made it through every big section of parameters here on the Juno, you might think, man, these are totally different. Why would anybody think they're the same? Well, they're much closer than they feel. And when you dissect them at this level, of course they're going to feel different. The Nymphes, in so many ways, can get you to the Juno thing in a smaller form factor. That's not what it's trying to do. And I want it to be appreciated for what it is and not just the Juno thing, okay? I want you... Mostly, the outcome of this video I want you to think differently of the Juno and many other classic synths. If you've been subscribed for a while, you'll know I have this mentality of trying to show you other things can cover the ground of what we put up on a pedestal often. I've done patch packs that copy the Juno sounds and the JX3P sounds, and I have a series called Redirect Your Gas. The point of both of those is in large part the same, that whatever it is you're lusting over, you can get there with something else, and often you can get there with something that's less expensive or less trouble. The Juno is cool and special. I'm glad to have it. I like to use it. But other things can do those sounds, Nymphes included. And it doesn't have to be of identical architecture to deliver similar enough sounds. Especially with subtractive synthesis, you can filter out a lot of what you would notice as a difference. But I also value accurate information and good detail. And the good details for comparing these two things is they're really different. So I sort of hinted at it with the envelopes, but what are other things you could do on the Nymphes to stay close to the Juno sound? Well, first and foremost, I'm just going to do it because I haven't done it yet, you might want to buy a chorus. So this is the Juno on chorus 1. And here's the Nymphes. I'm not claiming this is identical, but here's chorus 1 on the Nymphes and the Juno. Here's chorus 2. In general, we have more low end on the Nymphes, which comes out as being darker. And this has a little less high end, I think, than the chorus in general does on the Juno. But I'm telling you, this is futile. There's no reason to do this. I could go back and forth on that, and I'm disappointed in myself for doing that, because that's what I'm not trying to do. Because I don't think going back and forth A and B with two things that you know are fundamentally different is going to get you anywhere. Anyways, cool. Is this chorus identical? No. I actually gave it an entire video. I'll let you investigate that, where I go back and forth with just the Juno. And on the topic of this chorus, I feel kind of similarly that if it's not identical to the Juno, does that mean it's bad? No. This is selling you on the fact that it is. So, take that with a grain of salt if it is or isn't. But this is an easy way to get good chorus sounds. If they're identical or the LFO is slightly different, does that mean it's bad? No, it doesn't. This sounds good. Does it sound identical to this? That's up to you, man, and that's up to the situation. Okay, and now I'm going to be really pedantic for a little bit. So to be identical to the Juno, you would have to have one LFO, the same one, controlling your pulse width and your pitch and your filter. Can you do that on the Nymphes? You can, Almost. Is the Juno good, and does it sound good because you only have one LFO locked to your pitch, your pulse within your filter? No, that's just part of the way it works. And it seems ridiculous to say, man, I wish the Nymphes could have one global LFO pointed to all three of those things when you have a second LFO, and they can be different. Or you can have varying pitches of a single LFO because LFO 1 is per voice. And so I use that example because it feels the silliest, but expand that to anything else it does. You know what I mean? This is different from the Juno because it has two envelopes. Well, you just have a little bit more control, and you can program the Nymphes to behave like this or to make similar sounds, which is the whole goal, right? This is an instrument. So this has become a bit of a tirade. This video was made, to be honest, kind of out of spite. Okay, part of why I did this and part of why I love YouTube. I'm not going to be as candid as I'd like to be. So part of why I like YouTube, part of why I like what I do. I can see that video from, you know, a pretty significantly large organization with legitimate financial backing and some serious motivation to sell things. And I like the idea, and I could say, you know what, I can do a better job of teaching that, put up my video, and it'll be successful in my own terms and at my own rate and in my own scale. And I quite like that, okay? So to summarize, these are fundamentally different in a lot of ways. They can cover a lot of the same ground, though. And I think you need to understand what parts of the restrictions, what parts of the limitations of the more limited thing, in this case it's the Juno, it could be anything though, but understand which limitations are valuable to its essence, right? What about the Juno is essential to it sounding the way it does? That's different per patch, that's different per individual. Whatever you identify as essential to the Juno is what matters. Is it just a stereo chorus? That might be it. Is it a stereo chorus at this rate? You know, is it a stereo chorus that achieves its stereo in a certain way? You could be as specific as you want. It might just be that it's a synthesizer. Do you get what I'm saying? What is essential to the Juno? To me, one oscillator and a sub and a stereo chorus. The Nymphes can do all that. So just because they're fundamentally different, and I showed you they're fundamentally different, doesn't mean that they can't do the same things. Doesn't mean that one's bad. Doesn't mean that one's better. Just means that you need to understand their differences if you're trying to emulate the vibe of a specific piece of gear. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's fun to be inspired by that. It's fun to embrace those limitations. It can be creatively valuable to embrace limitations and keep yourself within the bounds of, you know, keep yourself within the bounds or the limits that people you look up to had, or music that you respect, you know, was created under. But nothing's bad because it's different. Nothing's better or worse because it's different. They're just different. So there you go. I could say that in 100 ways. My name's Jorb. I love gear. Includes the Nymphes. Includes the Juno. Hope I see you in the next one. Cheers. Jeez. Criminy.